And we are live. Let's give everybody a little moment to see that we're live here. Let me start making sure that I can see it on my page. Let me see. Yep, we got some viewers. Hi, everybody. I am Maria Davis Pierre. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I am the CEO and founder of Autism in Black Inc., which aims to support Black parents who have a child who is diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Tonight, we're going to be talking about protecting our Black children. As we know, a lot has been going on in the media about racial trauma, racism, and we just want to make sure that we are protecting our children as best we can. I have a very special guest here, Miss Joy Johnson, soon to be Dr. Joy Johnson. I had to put that out there.
Thank
When you get
you.
that, it's going to be, So tell us about yourself. Tell the people, tell us about yourself.
So, I'm autistic, but I'm also a behavior specialist. I have a master's in ABA, and I'm working on my PhD in ABA. I also have a master's in education, but psychology is where I'm at now.
hmm And for those of you who don't know, Joy was on one of the episodes of our podcast in season 1, and it was one of the highly popular episodes. And we did touch a little bit on this topic on that podcast. And so we're just going to go ahead and dig in now and start. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comment box and we will see them. And once we get to your question, we'll actually post it on the screen while we're answering it. You will see Joy's website scrolling across the bottom. She has a new tab on her site. Can you tell us about the new tab on your site that people can
So,
go to?
I got several public donations to help Black families with Black autistic children and adults, or individual adults that are, autistic, to get behavioral services. So if you go on my website and you see the Black Spectrum Fund, you can click the button to request cost services free of cost. If you are in a position where you can't afford them, or you just don't have access because of your insurance, whatever the case may be, if you need resources, I got you.
And she is amazing. So please, if you have the chance to, have her help you with behavior services, please do so. So when we started with the podcast, we were talking about things that our Black children can't do. And some things they cannot do in public because they're Black. Me as an individual who is not autistic, even when I go in public, we have to mask and do certain things because we're Black and we get looked at a certain way if we do things. So Joy was talking about um, behavioral services for your children to help with certain behaviors because we can't do those things in public. So I'm going to let Joy speak on that issue first, because I know that is kind of a touchy subject. So we are going to start there.
So first off, I want to say the behaviors that I'm talking about is like aggression,
hmm
self-injury, inappropriate touch. Because like sometimes our kids are real loving too. So inappropriate touch can even include like hugging strangers. However, when it comes to stemming, like hand flapping and stuff, I'm not talking about targeting that so they don't do it in public. I'm talking about teaching them the social skills to know how to advocate and disclose immediately and appropriately when they do encounter police officers. So
hmm
that way we're not teaching them to suppress, that, because if you teach them not to stem, that can suppress their emotions and their regulation, and that may cause aggression or, self-injury.
hmm
So you want to prepare them and equip them with how to disclose and when to disclose. If they're not able to do that cognitively, you still need to teach them how to present a card that says these behaviors that they may engage in, things that your child is prone to. I made a generic one that you can, get, and teachers pay teachers, but you can just go on any website that you make business cards on and kind of use that same kind of format and just put like, my name, I am autistic. My name is whatever your child's name is. You
Mhm.
can put I do not like touch, like just very individual, like unique to them. I do not like touch. I may get excited or overwhelmed. I may repeat words. If you ask me questions, I may not answer it. I may just repeat what you say. So you want to put these things so the officers would know. And then at the end, you want to say, please call my advocate and put the name of you or a relative or an advocacy agency so they know, who to contact. Ideally, if the child can cognitively comprehend, like questions and, things of that nature, you want to teach them if they're asked if they want to remain silent to say, yes, I want to remain silent until my advocate or parent comes.
Mhm.
Um, with adults that may have some intellectual disabilities and are also autistic, like if you have an adult child, you want to really, really make sure you drive that home, because just because they have autism does not mean they can't be charged. That doesn't mean you're incompetent by the law. So if they were to accuse them of something and question them, and they're talking, they can
Mhm.
use that. And it takes a lot to prove that they're not competent, and they have to sit in jail until you do that. So you want to really encourage, like, and make them, teach them how to say it nicely. Like, I would like to wait until my family comes before I speak to you because I don't understand. Just really clear.
Mhm.
Um, but you want to drive home that point if they are able. If they are not able, and I still say even if they are able, you might want to put that on that card too. Like, please do not ask me any questions until my advocate arrives after you put your
Mhm.
number. Then that way it's safe, you know?
Mhm. Those are very good tips. I'm in here just, taking it all in. Because I know a worry for a lot of us as parents is that the comprehension issue, you know,
Yeah.
uh, is she going to be able to understand, like, before they even get to, here's my card, my child may be doing certain things that may make them look suspect, if they're not responding right when they are talking to them. There might be a lag in between your question and my child's response. So I know these are a lot of worries that we have as parents, and a lot of it is out of our control. um, when it comes to it, for some of you who were in my anxiety webinar, we talked about things in our control and things out of our control that cause anxiety. And a lot of it is out of our control that causes anxiety. We can prepare our children as much as possible. Still, when they get in the situation, things may go differently. And that is
Right.
out of our control. There's nothing we can really do about it. We can prepare our children as best as possible, but then there's
Right.
things like lobbying for disability rights. There's things like lobbying um, for your police officers, for the precinct, to make sure that they're getting trained appropriately. Joy was saying that, what is the training, like 45 minutes that they're getting?
Yeah, it's an hour sometimes at best.
Mm-hmm.
It's really generic. I want to mention that you keep saying the word prepared. And that's something that resonates with me, is because I was asked this week, why didn't you just make a social story that says all cops are bad? And like, I don't
Mm-hmm.
want Black children to be afraid.
Mm-hmm.
Because number one, fear can be the antecedent to additional behavior, social anxiety, which will cause them in a real life situation to melt down and not be able to, protect themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important that you are careful in how you convey messages to them. You want to convey it in a way that they feel like they're prepared, not afraid. So you want to promote preparedness and not fear. So
Yeah.
they just know if this happens, I have to prepare for it, but not like be afraid, because because
Mm-hmm.
that fear can actually, most of us know, our children, that fear can make you just spaz out. And
It
that would,
can.
that's
It
counterproductive
can.
to what we want to do. We want to just
Mm-hmm.
make them prepared and not afraid. So,
Exactly, because I know, for instance, with my child, she has anxiety. So, if I'm saying certain things, then she gets in a situation where she's actually with a police officer and it's going through her head that they're all bad, they're all going to hurt me. Then it's going to, you know, have her, I guess, what characteristics of being autistic be more profound. So for instance, she would be able to have a conversation, but in that instance she's going to shut down and not be able to talk at all. So those things would be, I guess, more prevalent. I know you were saying that in some situations you could be at this point, as on the spectrum, but then in certain situations where your anxiety is high or you're comfortable, you'll be at a totally different point on the spectrum. So we have to take that in mind when we're having these conversations with our children, because we don't want them to then get in the situation and then they're thinking like, oh my God, I'm just going to die regardless. And then, they just shut down all the way, because my child will shut down. She won't say anything. She'll just sit there and cry, or she'll start stimming, and those stems can then be seen as, oh my God, what she's doing, what is she doing, what's this little black girl doing. So we have to make sure that we're trying to prepare them in the safest way possible. I know we're getting some
Let me add,
questions.
if their child is non-vocal and they use a device, when they're not with you and they're potentially in a situation where something could occur, you want to make sure they have a device that has a strap, and either have them wear it around their neck or wear it on, like a purse on their arm, because you don't want them digging in their pockets to try to do things. Like in the
Mm,
story, I also put, go in my pockets. So they need
mm-hmm,
to use the device to tell the police where the card is located. The card is located in my front pocket, but they would need the device to communicate that.
mm-hmm,
So make sure they
mm-hmm,
have a device so they can communicate it, and they just don't try to reach in their pocket and pull it out, because that's a sudden movement. So
mm-hmm,
you want to prepare them, like, use your device, tell them where it's at. Now, if the police direct them, you can go in your pocket, that's different. But I think for safety reasons, we need to say first, and then prepare your child, especially if they're tactile offensive. The police may touch you, because they may need to go in your pocket, number one, and then they search people, so you have to prepare them for that touch, and you need to develop coping strategies and practice it and rehearse it, deep breathing, or if this happens, and rehearse it so it's something that they are familiar with, and they just kind of know how to go through the steps if it happens in real life.
mm-hmm. So we have a question here. It says, have you ever had parents or advocates bring the cards to police stations for them to know what a visual looks like?
To be honest, Catherine, I have not. this is this is something that I always teach my clients, but I
Hmm.
have never got to the point where I take it to a police station. But that's a great idea. But
Hmm.
there's also going to be like different kinds of cards, depending on if parents make themselves, and you might even
Hmm.
want to get double-sided tape and put it on the back of your child's ID. That's
Hmm.
also an idea, or you want to have several of them, so, and let them know if the police officers take it, it's okay. It's a card. We
Hmm.
can replace it,
Hmm.
but I have not. That's actually, that's a good idea. That's something that I would implement into training, and telling them that they may have some variation of a card.
Janelle says, unfortunately, my child elopes without notice, and there's a high possibility he may not have that card. Is there a database or something we can register our autistic children in the event that they elope or wander off?
Not that I'm aware of. You got some good followers with some good questions. Yeah, y'all need to get on this. You need to. What was her name?
Shout out to the Autism and Black followers.
Right. What was her name? Whatever your name was, you need to
Janelle.
come up with that.
Janelle.
We need to market that system, Janelle, and we could,
Hmm.
like, that would be a great idea. That's a great idea, but unfortunately it's not existent now, but
Hmm. Hmm. And I know that in one of the cities here in Florida, I think it was Tampa, they were going to start a database like that, but there was a lot of those who were actually autistic and had disabilities that didn't trust what the police would do with their information. So I don't know where that stands now, but I know there was a lot of back and forth regarding starting the database because they didn't know how the police would then interact with them.
I think Virginia has it where you can get it put on their ID, like that they are autistic. However, Janelle, you may think about a bracelet. You still can get
Hmm.
a medical alert bracelet, and the medical alert bracelet can tell, the police that it'll serve as that purpose until you come up with that invention. That is, like,
And then Tia says taking your child to meet first responders is helpful, and that is true. I know they can also come to your home as well and have a meet and greet. You can set it up, so that is something that you can do and have the officers be familiar with who your child is and letting them know that your child is autistic, and then that these are certain ways that they may act if you ever see them, but also taking them to meet them as well. So that is a good idea as well. Let's see, the comments are just keep them coming, you guys. Let's see.
I'm so
uh,
not savvy. I don't even know how you got pictures of these people popping up.
they, they're commenting. So it just pops up. Well, when I see it, I just put it on the screen. Angela says, are police officers educated or trained and familiar with characteristics, behavior of kids with autism?
Some, but the ones that
Mm-hmm.
are very minimal. As we
Mm-hmm.
talked about earlier, it's like maybe an hour to 45 minutes. And here in Maryland, I have actually been I have been on cases where it's court mandated behavioral therapy because they responded and then the person got charges because they assaulted the police officer because the police officer didn't know how to
Mm-hmm.
handle the situation, so they ended up getting charged. So it's very minimal.
Yes, and I think it lacks a lot, especially when it comes to cultural responsiveness.
Mhm.
I think it lacks in that area, and that is something that we do need to, you know, actually lobby for to change, because our children are seen differently. That's just the truth of it. We know it. I mean, we're
Out here,
having I
like
don't know.
here in Baltimore, I walked up on a scene where a very large, he was a child though. He was 14. He was probably 250 pounds. So he was a big child, but he was a child.
Mhm,
And he was non-vocal. And the way that they were handling him, I know he
mhm,
felt attacked. And
mhm,
luckily, I just happened to be on that block when it happened. But he was like tossing him out the way. And next, I know it would have been, like some
mhm,
type of gun situation. And they just didn't know, like how to handle him. I'm like, how do you guys not have training? How do you
yeah.
not know how to handle people?
Exactly. And I know you were saying that if you need to call the first responders, to who do they need to ask for? Not the police, but the
Crisis intervention services. Like in
mhm,
Baltimore, we have that. I'm sure it might be called something else in other states, but they do. You need to make sure that you specifically say, I don't need the police. My child or the person has an intellectual or a developmental, disability, and I
mhm,
need something to deal with crisis, not police officers. And there's
mhm,
every state usually has a team, but again, it's usually like one. Like so.
mhm,
Sometimes they may say they're not available.
mhm, mhm. And I think as parents, as I was saying, we just put all the pressure on ourselves to make sure that we're covering all of our bases. And the reality of it is we can't do that. It's just not possible. So even though we're having this talk and we're talking about how to talk to your kids by using the social stories, Joy has a great post on her Facebook page that goes through different steps. She has the ID card that you can get. You can actually get your the armbands, and what else, there are many other things that you can do, but in other instances we also have to make sure that you know white people are talking to their children on how to be anti-racist. That's a big thing that needs to happen, giving them resources, having these conversations in their household. Just as much as I'm having the talk with my kids, they need to be having talks with their kids. We need to be lobbying. I can't say this enough, to make sure that certain things are getting changed. Because even though we prepare A, B, and C, it our children are still going, to have these interactions where they're still going to be seen a certain way just because they're Black.
And I want to
Let,
bring up, by no means should we have to
mhm,
prepare to defend our own abuse. However,
mhm,
if you are prepared and something happens to your child, and they're hurt, and it's like he had a card on him,
mhm,
like we were prepared for this, that will prove even more that whatever the police officer did was,
mhm,
not not appropriate. and that it was, indeed like misconduct and not,
Exactly.
supposed to be. So
Exactly. Let's see. She says in Austin they are called mental health officers. Oh, okay. Do they have mental health training as well? Are they like what is it? Mental health first aid trained as well? How do we advocate for more training with first responders? Do we work with local police, state delegates, mayors, county executives? Is the problem lack of funding?
you know the answer to that question.
I surely do.
Look, y'all, I'm behavior. I, I don't know all of that, and I'm not gonna mislead you. Like I don't know it, I'm gonna tell you.
So you can do it on all levels. You can start with the local police and go in there and talk with them about it. They may have somebody who trains them already in this area, or you can prove that you are competent enough to train them in the area. So you can always start with the local and then, of course, go up the ladder to make sure that they are getting appropriate training. There's always talks of lack of funding when it comes to certain things, but is it true lack of funding? I don't know, but has it been said? Yes. So just like in the
Look,
schools.
if anybody watching, I'll do it for free. We can do a Zoom. We really, I'm black and I'm black. I'm autistic and I know about behavior. So
Look.
I know I can cover that subject because I was, somebody talked to me about doing it with Baltimore, and I'm like, I will do it in Baltimore. Like I don't care. I need to protect my
Hmm.
my people. Like I'm not trying to
Hmm.
charge, but I will do it for free.
Look, there's a resource for you guys as officers. Let's see. These comments are coming in quickly. I'm trying to slow them down so I can see them. She said, this has definitely inspired me to really do research about what's going on in my city and ask for some of these programs. Yes, I think, like I was saying, as parents, we can only do so much. We can only talk so much. Our children are only going to comprehend so much. Even me as an individual who is not autistic, when I get in certain situations that I have prepared for and I am anxious, I forget stuff. So, our children are going to be in that same situation as well. So we have to make sure that the people around them are prepared just as much as our children are prepared. So it's going to be your best bet to make sure that the people around them are getting the trainings. The people around them are um, even anti-racism trainings. These trainings need to be happening. Racial trauma trainings. These trainings need to be happening. What's the stats on somebody who is autistic having what is it called? I can't even think now. Occurrence with the police, having a face-to-face contact with the police.
1 in 5 just autism. So of
Hmm.
course, being black, like that makes it higher because we have our
Hmm.
own statistics. But 1 in 5, it says before the age of 21, 1 in 5
Hmm.
people with autism will have an encounter. And so
Hmm.
imagine being a black male, on top of
Hmm.
that, because men is higher, but like, and men are higher, and then black people are higher. So you got black
Exactly.
autistic male. That's like wow. You have to really prepare.
Hmm. And it's not just for them, going down the street. We're talking about in the schools as well. A lot of children who have behavior issues get the police called on them in school, especially when they are Black children. It happens quite, it's an issue,
I've
before I
been
get
in a
on my soapbox.
Well, I've been in a school, of course, it will
Hmm.
remain unnamed, but it was a public school out here in Maryland, and I've
Hmm.
seen a white child do it, and they called the police, but it was in a friendly way because he liked the officer. But then I seen a black child do it, and they called the police to get him arrested. And I'm
Hmm.
like that
Hmm.
was like wow, like this is crazy.
Exactly. Exactly. So we have to be making sure our schools are, getting the appropriate training. They are severely unprepared. And I'm telling you, as a mental health professional, they lack a lot of training. just all around. And it does have to do with funding. It does have to do with certain obligations that they have to make sure that they're required to do. But all around, they are lacking in this area. You know, especially in Florida, we have Baker Act. I know it's called different things in other places, but that's where they can put you in the mental health facility for, what is it, 48 hours, 72 hours. And children are getting called, the police are being called on them at school, and they're being Baker acted, because the school lacks understanding in the child's diagnosis. So this is about going to your schools and making sure that they are properly trained as well. So it's just ridiculous. So we just have to make sure that not only we're talking about the cops that they're just going to be seeing in your neighborhood, we're talking about on the school level as well. We need to be making sure, that they are out there knowing that, our children exist, and that these are the ways that you need to be um, having encounters with my children. I let them know, you don't need to be calling the police on my child. You need to call me first. And my child doesn't even have any behavior issues that I'm worried about, but I'm letting them know, hey, look, this can't occur. You have to have the appropriate training.
The
Yes,
teachers
one.
unprepared too, because they're so desperate for teachers that most of the teachers, like, I was in a classroom that had a classroom full of children that were severely impacted by
Mhm,
disabilities, and this person
mhm,
used to own a store, and the store
mhm.
got closed, and they became a teacher. So
Yep.
like she just had a degree but no certification or anything, and
Hmm.
they made her a special ed teacher, and I'm
Yeah,
like,
you would be surprised. In Florida, you do not need to have a background, or your degree does not need to be in education. I can
yeah,
go and take the test and be somebody's teacher, and I don't need to be anybody's teacher. I'm letting y'all know that is not my ministry. Okay, if crisis schooling has taught me anything, it's that I am in the right field. So yes, and then they're having our children in their classroom, especially if your child is in a general education setting and they have the IEP, they're not knowing, like, oh my God, why are they doing this? Why won't they sit down? Why won't they do this? You need to read their IEP, you need to get acquainted with these things. So the school is lacking training all the way around. And it's also because they don't prioritize making sure that they're getting the necessary trainings. So their first thought is, oh, let me call the police that this child is, wrecking havoc in the room. Let me call the police because the police are going to make it better. But in situations where it involves us, it doesn't make it better a lot of the times. Let's see. She says we need to press for autism organizations to see intersectionality race as core to supporting the autism community, not something to think about after dealing with the core issue of racism. I've encountered that with two different autism groups this week.
hmm.
Would you like to speak on that?
Go first.
I don't have anything to say about that. I just think a lot of the key autism organizations lack diversity. They lack being culturally responsive. If I was to go look on their site, there's nobody that looks like me or my child. So that lets me know right there where they stand on being diverse and
I'm,
culturally responsive.
I saw on Facebook that there were a lot of like white parents that were still saying the all lives matter. They didn't grasp the concept,
Mm,
and I think a lot of the parents are like they're leaders of these organizations, and so they only see
mhm,
that one perspective of their child, and they don't see like our perspectives, of what
mhm,
the danger, like it almost feels
exactly.
imminent. It's like
Mhm,
it's like you're like you're afraid, and it's so sad that
mhm,
you have to feel like that, because even I feel like that, and I'm an adult, and I feel like I largely have everything under control. However, I used to live out of the country. When we first moved back to the U.S., I was having nightmares about being pulled
mhm,
over after Sandra Bland, because
mhm,
I'm like, I think that I might get agitated or have some type of meltdown, or
mhm,
and then what would
mhm,
happen to me? Like, would
mhm,
they kill me? What if I have selective mutism? What if I went mute? Would
mhm,
they of not responding? And
mhm,
so I was like afraid. I was really afraid.
mhm. And how did you deal with it, or is it still something that? Because I know I'm just still afraid anyway.
I have not been pulled over since I've been back, and it might be because I'm driving extra carefully, but I have not been. But I know for a fact. Before I left, I'm not gonna say that I really thought about it, but I know for a fact now I would make sure my hands were visible. I probably would
Mhm.
turn on my phone right away to
Mhm.
record, and
Mhm.
it's sad that I feel like that I feel,
Mhm.
and I'm just afraid that they would be like, she's responding like she's on drugs. I'm
Mhm.
black, I'm black, so they're gonna think that I'm a drug addict or something.
Mhm.
There's no way I could be autistic. I'm a drug addict,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
that's the thing because I present. People say I pass, as
Yeah.
neurotypical.
Mhm.
If I were to have some type of meltdown or episode, it would appear probably to them that I, had a
Mhm.
psychiatric disorder or was on drugs because people also don't know the spectrum of how autism can look.
Yeah.
So it's like even if I told them, they might think I was lying or something. If you
Mhm.
if you haven't had exposure. So
Exactly. And then it's the we how can you prove that you're autistic type of thing, so
right,
I think so it's like are you when you're getting pulled over, we're teaching our children these things, and then it's like, well, some police officers, they're like, well, prove it. How am I going to prove that
and
I am
that
autistic?
brings another like right, like we should have the right to disclose or not. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, the times that we live in, while I like to say, if you're comfortable, do so. I feel like if your child is may encounter the police, you have to tell them to disclose, even though that's a privacy thing, and you shouldn't have to. But I feel like we
Mhm.
have to. We have
Mhm.
to say, look, I'm autistic, even if that's something that you
Mhm.
don't normally do.
Yes, and she said that's a good point. Passing is neurotypical. Yes, and I think that's one of the reasons that we like to get away from that language of high functioning versus lower functioning, because, like we were saying earlier, my child can, in certain situations where she's relaxed and calm and she feels comfortable, she can pass, but then in situations where her anxiety is high, things like that, she is going to be more like at a level 2 or 3 on the spectrum, and that's because she's not comfortable. And in those situations where we have to, encounter police officers and things that heighten our anxiety just because we're black and we've seen the news and we see how it can go left really quickly without us doing anything, those are situations where our children's anxieties can heighten. We're preparing them, we're having this talk with them, they're seeing what's happening in the news because it's everywhere, so they're seeing all of this, and their anxiety probably right now is high, so we have
Yeah,
to address that as well, having the talk with them about their mental health and checking in with them, letting them know that this the reality of it is, yes, it does occur,
right,
yes, I can't reassure you and say this is never going to happen to you, because we can't say that,
right.
so it's checking in with them and making sure that you are addressing also their mental health needs, because it's everywhere right now. Anytime we're talking it all on Facebook, that's all on I can't even get a break from it, so and I want to have a break from it, but we can't as black people, because it's our life that we
I
live.
got look. I got two things to say. I think it's very interesting how historically Black people always have to pass for something,
Mhm.
like
Mhm.
bringing up the word passing. We always have
Mhm.
to camouflage, some way, and that just kind of hit me when she put that on the screen. I'm like,
Mhm.
Dad, we still passing. But
Yeah.
number two, I know, people want to protect their children, and I know
Mhm.
nobody is trying to intentionally inflict any type of harm. But I really, really have to press the issue, like you're saying. I don't care if your child is non-vocal. I don't care if they're non-verbal. They can hear what's going on.
Mhm.
Even if
Mhm.
they're deaf and they can't hear, they see the news. They see
Mhm.
outside. And as coming from somebody who was, non-vocal, we absorb. Your senses are heightened even more. We can also sense your emotions better. I feel
Mhm.
like, like we can read. You know how you lose one sense and you have a stronger sense, so they can
Yes.
see sadness. They can feel your sadness, and they deserve to know what's going on, and it's kind of given, it's an injustice not to tell them because you're not preparing them. So as much
Mhm.
as it may hurt and it's painful and as hard as it is, you have to address it. You have to,
Mhm.
in terms that they understand, just it's
Exactly.
simple, like the social story that I said, that I made said, I described what a racist is. You know, a
Mhm.
racist is someone who doesn't like someone whose skin color is other than theirs. But also, racists can have important jobs sometimes. But they need to know not everybody that's white is a racist, but sometimes you may encounter them and you need to prepare for
Mhm.
it. You know, you need to be
Mhm.
safe. And that's why I
Exactly.
also ended the story with, love your skin because your skin is beautiful. Because I don't want you to feel like you don't like it because you think that you're going to be hurt because of it. It's
Mhm.
just some people out there that, are not good people, So,
Exactly. Exactly. And
mhm.
I think it's a good place. Those social stories are a good place to start the conversation, especially for a lot of us who don't know where to start this conversation with our children. They're like, I don't know how to talk to my kid about this, because we're still
Yeah.
processing it as adults, and now we're trying to have these conversations with our children to prepare them and keep them as safe as we can. So those social stories are a great place to start the conversation, and have them ask questions, let them marinate and think on it, and then come back with their questions if they have any, and answer them, but have an honest conversation where you're not sugarcoating it or reassuring them to the point that they will believe it won't happen to them, because that's not
And
what we want to do.
kids, a lot of autistic kids love their iPad and Roblox and all of that. I will tell
Hmm.
y'all today, I was in the car with my daughter, and she read to me. She was like, "Somebody on Roblox just said no justice, no peace." And then she said back, because she has that text to talk thing. She was like, "Yes, Black Lives Matter," and she's 6. And I'm like, so but then I heard that they had a protest on Roblox. So
Oh,
the
wow.
kids know what's going on because they
Hmm.
it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. So we're thinking that we're, sheltering them from it, but they're actually seeing it. So we need to have the conversation. And because we're avoiding having the conversation with them, they're getting all tons of information, and then their anxiety can be rising, or they're worried and they're like, I don't know what to do. And we're just thinking that they're not seeing it. So, have the conversation. We need to be having these conversations. And in my opinion, 6, 5, 4, those ages are not too young to have the conversations
They lucky
with.
they not right now, because if they was in school, they would be talking amongst themselves about
You
it.
you are right. Uh, Christina says, how do you address differences in the way your Black child with autism is treated versus the way a white child is treated with regard to non-typical behaviors that may be considered unusual or aggressive?
Meaning, how do you talk to your child about it? Like, do you get what clarify that for me? Look, I
Mhm.
need you to.
Let me see. So I believe what she's saying is that how do we, are you talking about with other people or with your child? Because she may be saying, how do we talk with our child about how their differences with autism may be seen different from a white peer who is autistic,
You
so
have
how they would be seen versus.
you have to explain racism first of all, and then you have to explain how we're perceived as a threat sometimes by racists. People who don't understand that we're just a skin color and we're not, a
Hmm.
different type of human that are all aggressive and like
Hmm.
you
She
have to be
says.
addressing it with other people. Oh, with other people, I mean, I'm gonna be y'all. I'm autistic. I'm direct. Um, I've had conversations with white people, and I tell them what I see from my standpoint. I say that I feel like you guys see us as a threat, and like you think we're aggressive. Or does she really mean like teachers, like telling the teachers, that too?
Maybe just in general. Maybe in general.
I think being having real conversations with people.
Hmm.
I often talk with I say things that make people uncomfortable, I guess. But once you have that dialogue, you realize that sometimes it's just a lot of misunderstanding. It's a lot of implicit bias, and that
Hmm.
implicit bias comes from a lack of exposure. So
Hmm.
sometimes when you're that person that decides, I'm going to talk to this person and have a conversation with them, and they may have had that, or they may even be like an upfront
Hmm.
racist, but sometimes having
Hmm.
that conversation they can say, wow, because you can change their mind frame. Like, this is not what I
Hmm.
thought a black person was, so I believe in
Hmm.
having a lot of conversations. I once walked up to somebody with Hail Hitler tattoo, and just we had a
Oh, wow.
conversation. I was curious, and we had a conversation, and it was so funny because his wife walked up and she looked so mad. They were like bikers, and she's like, "What is she
Mm,
talking?" But and I think by the end of that conversation, just because I initiated, he saw
mhm,
like, okay, maybe some of the things that I thought were wrong, because he
mhm.
engaged. It wasn't like a.
Yeah, yeah. So I yes, and I am on the different end of that. I'm not as progressive. So I have conversation with those that, um, especially in regards to my child, that I feel I should have the conversation with. I don't feel everybody is deserving of having those conversations with, and I don't feel the need to disclose to everyone that my child, even though I sit on this platform all day and talk about my child who is autistic.
No, I agree with that. I feel like your child is old enough, to let you know. And young children can say, because I ask parents to ask their child all the time, like ask them, is it okay? If your child
Mhm,
says it's okay, then fine. But I'm not saying talk, go up to everybody and tell them I have an autistic child, because I believe
mhm,
that people should have. I'm comfortable disclosing, but that doesn't mean everybody is, and
mhm.
they should be able to tell who they are on their terms when they're ready. So
Exactly.
that's
Mhm,
why, I'm not even real big on parents wearing shirts. You can wear shirts promoting autism acceptance, but you don't have to, like tell every little, because that's like, they're like, why do you have to tell everybody? You walk into the school, maybe they didn't want their peers to know yet, because teenagers are
mhm.
weird, adolescents are weird, they're not ready. You
That's a
know, I,
good point.
I have a problem with, out here in Baltimore, they have classrooms for autism, but it's still like a special ed classroom because there's no distinct or general way to teach somebody with autism. But I
Mm,
feel like that's a civil rights issue because they're disclosing their diagnosis to the whole school. No
mhm.
other classroom has, three schizophrenics and one bipolar on the door. Like, so like you got to think of my perspective as an autistic person. Like,
So three schizophrenics and one bipolar.
you don't need to tell my business. So on the
That
doors.
and I yes, I completely agree with that. So in having the conversation, especially in having like if I'm having the conversation with a mom who is white and her child is autistic, and I'm talking about it how it works for us being in the black community, and how we're perceived. A lot of times they don't understand the message because autism as a whole has a stigma, but I have to let them know that yes, autism as a whole has a stigma, but then here's the black part of it as well, because not
Mm-hmm.
only does autism have a stigma, but being black and autistic has a stigma, so we're dealing with peeling back peeling back layers of an onion here. So when I'm having the conversation in general with people, I just let them know on a scale one, the difference between being black and white in society. Me being a neurotypical black woman versus a neurotypical white woman, there's going to be differences. We're going to be perceived differently. If I get a little, rowdy in my voice, I'm seen as an angry black woman. They're going to be seen as passionate. Then I bring it down on another scale of, okay, now we're talking with disabilities. Now we're talking black child with disability versus white child with disability. So I bring it down that way for them to understand that my child is always, at this time, unfortunately, going to be seen differently from a white child who is autistic. It's just the way it is because they're going to see my child's skin color before they see anything else. And
Mm-hmm.
I know that's a big fear for us as parents is that we're not even going to get to the point where an officer can get that card. We're not even going to get to the point where the officer sees our child's band on their arm. They're not even going to get to disclose that I'm autistic, so you have to do these things certain way to interact with me. We have a fear that they're not going to get to any of that before the encounter in our children's life will be in harm. I know that that is a definite fear, and it's a fear of mine that I have. It's a fear of joy that she has, as an adult. I'm sure for her children as well. It's just a fear that we have. So, like I was saying, we prepare as much as we can, but we can't prepare for everything. Let me see. She says it's nothing to be ashamed of, but she respects that her team may not want his diagnosis shared
Right.
with everybody. Hmm.
Is she he or is it a he or she may not be ready? I
Yep,
think it's a
he.
he may not be ready. He has to do it in his time when he's, comfortable.
Listen, Joy, she cracks me up all the time. That three schizophrenics and the one bipolar.
that because neurotypical that they could be that, so
Hmm.
like,
She says it's hard because her baby is nonverbal and requires more help due to cognitive complications. Yes, and I completely understand that. That's a worry that we have. Like I was saying, it's just so we can only prepare so much, and as parents we also need to make sure that we're investing in self-care, for us as well. It's everywhere right now, and for us as Black people, we are exhausted, we are tired, we are overwhelmed, we are tired of talking about being Black. This is our everyday thing, and while people are just waking up and seeing like, oh, okay, we know that this is how it's been for us our whole life. And
yeah.
quite frankly, I've
I mean,
gotten to the point where I'm tired of talking about it.
on one side, I have
Mhm.
quite a few white friends that have texted me and like, "How are you?" It's
Mhm.
a tough time. I'm like, "Girl, it's a tough time that you seeing right now, but it's always a tough time." What you mean? Like
Mhm.
this tough time is every day. You just seeing it televised
Exactly.
on television right
Exactly.
now. It's the everyday thing. Like this is something we have to go
Every day.
all the time. I'm married to a Black man. When he
Mhm.
leaves the house, I
Mhm.
have to worry that he don't get pulled over.
Mhm.
Not because he riding dirty, because he ain't. It's because he Black.
Exactly. My husband is a physician, but he is a big Black man, and I worry about him every day when he goes out. I worry about my 4-year-old son, and he's 4, but he's Joy has helped me with certain behaviors with him, because I'm like, we got to start early, and that's something that us as Black parents that we have to think about, which is the sad part. We have to start early with these behaviors, because I don't want certain things when they're seen out in public and people think, oh my God, he's just gonna be a Black boy with a problem right there, you know.
Dear white people, please know also that our professions do not exclude us because we don't wear our professions. People say to me all the time, well, have said to me recently, "You're not living that
Mhm.
oppressed, because you have this and that." I'm like,
Mhm.
my what I do for a living, my education, it doesn't. No, they don't care. I'm still Black. Like that override
Exactly.
that not that
Mhm.
trumps all that. I'm
Exactly. And
not exclude you, from oppression.
exactly. And I let people look. I am a therapist. Yes, I am. But trust and believe when it comes to my kids, anybody that I love, I'm not in a therapist space of mine right
Right.
there.
And you
I
really
I, I will not act accordingly.
and you have to think about it from the Black perspective. People are like, "Oh, but
Mhm.
you can't." I First of all, I live in a predominantly white neighborhood,
Mhm.
and so
Mhm.
people are like, "But you live in a predominantly white neighborhood." I'm like, "Yeah," and that makes me even
Mhm.
more of a target, number one. And they're like,
Mhm.
"We drive a nice car." Yeah, that makes me look like a drug dealer. Like that.
Exactly.
I can't possibly have a good education. I got to be some type
Yep.
of drug. So that's the reason
Exactly.
why I don't even try to buy fancy cars is because
Mhm.
I think that is just asking for trouble. Like when you're Black,
Yeah.
I just want to drive from here to there and I'm good. You know,
Exactly.
and that's crazy
Exactly.
that not that I'm a car person, but that's crazy that you have to think about those things because it's like if I have this
Mhm.
car, if I have these certain things, and then it's a where did you get that from? How did you? That happened
Mhm.
to me when I came through the border in Germany. It was fine, never had any problem. As soon as I came through the border, they were like, "Why were you in Germany for 7 years?" Looking at me as if like you Black. What was you doing there? I bet
Mhm.
they would ask
Mhm.
me if I was white. So
Exactly.
it's like you have
Exactly.
constantly, things that are going on. And
We
people
have
don't even
to
realize.
constantly.
People don't
They don't
realize.
they don't realize how, we're constantly having to prove ourselves. Even in our professions, we have to do this, constantly proving who we are, as Black people. And it gets tiring. As I was saying, my husband's a physician. He wears scrubs. People automatically think he's either the orderly or the nurse. you
Right.
know
That's what
they don't they don't think he's the physician. So this is stuff that we're constantly having to deal with. These are things that we have to talk to our children about, that when you go in this certain space and you go with your white friends, guess what? Your white friends can do these things, you can't do these things, and you can't do them just because you're Black. That's the, the explanation. It is heartbreaking to have these types of conversations and say these things, because it's the reality of it. We you can't do those things that because you're black. They can do those things because you're black. Because they're white. Your friends can go out and be out past the curfew, but you can't because you're black and you live in a predominantly white neighborhood, and you will automatically be seen as suspicious.
Mm-hmm. When I'm in the neighborhood, like the neighborhood I live
Hmm.
in particular, when I'm in the neighborhood, people speak to me, and then if they mention, how like you're talking, and I'm talking about white
Hmm.
people, and they're like, "Oh,
Hmm.
well, where do you live?" And I'm like, "I live here," and they're like, "You live here?" It's like they think I'm passing
Hmm.
through, and I'm like, "No, I live."
Hmm.
So, and this is supposed to
Hmm.
be a very liberal area, so they
Hmm.
they they talk the talk, but you can still see it sometimes, and it's just like,
Yep.
live here,
Yep.
yeah, I live right with you.
Exactly. Exactly. The same for us. And I think that's why I'm always so, you know, on it about making sure that my children, like when what happened when the virus started, my child's ABA therapist no longer was coming to the house. I was telling Joy, look, homeboy still needs to be seen. We still got to get these behaviors in order, because I still have to make sure that he's doing these things, because he has behavior issues where for us they're fine, but then when society sees him, they're like, hmm, what's
Yep.
going on here?
And
So it's like we always have to stay on top of it.
I've talked about that before in terms of like the autistic population online is largely white people, white women,
Hmm.
and they're always, talking about, just I can have screaming meltdowns in public because I'm autistic, and nobody. No, no.
Hmm.
First of all, masking doesn't mean not learning how to regulate. You know, like learning how to regulate is a independent skill, is a self management skill that you should have,
Hmm.
and it's more harmful for you to be hurting yourself, hurting other people. Masking does not mean
Hmm.
you have unmasking doesn't mean you have the license to wild out. Masking
Hmm.
just means don't pretend to be anything you're not, but you still got to regulate. You still have to learn
Hmm.
how to manage yourself. You can't just be like, I should be able to do what I want because I'm autistic. No, because if that's the case, we
Hmm.
could like people who weren't autistic can just do whatever they want. Like
Hmm.
everybody has to follow some set of rule governed behavior because that's the society we live in. We can't just be assaulting people because how are you allowed to?
Exactly.
Other people aren't. So
Hmm. And as black people, we don't get that pass to just
we
say,
don't.
I'm autistic, I can do this. We don't
I
get
could
that
not
pass.
flip out and scream and at work and have a job the next day. But
Hmm.
for my own self, my own health, I shouldn't want to do that. I should want to learn how to regulate. So when I'm talking
Hmm.
about treating behaviors, I'm not talking about making a child not STEM. I'm not talking
Hmm.
about suppressing who they are. I'm talking about help them manage who they are and regulate
Exactly.
in a way that's in a healthy manner so they know how to live their life without hurting themselves, other people, and live
Hmm.
productive lives, because that's not learning how to regulate, because you have a meltdown when you're overstimulated and you're not regulated, so you need to learn how to
Hmm.
regulate that so you won't have meltdowns.
Exactly. And these are skills that will help when having encounters with first responders. Having your child know how to self-regulate and cope, have those coping skills like Joy was talking about. Those are tools that are going to help them in those type of situations. So don't be fearful of behavioral services.
And you are the parent and you make the rules. If it's
Mm.
certain things that you're uncomfortable with and you feel like your behavior specialist or BCBA or whatever is targeting stuff that you are not comfortable with, you have a conversation with them and you let
Mm.
them know that you're not being culturally competent. Because in my house, our culture means that my child can be themselves, and
Mm.
we help him or her how to navigate through being autistic without trying to suppress who they are. You know.
Mm. Joy is preaching a word. I'm about to get up and run around this room.
I'm like, that lady, she black, autistic, angry. Like
I love Joy. I love her. Sis, can you talk a little about how Black autistic children don't have access to as many resources others may have, or how the school system may see your child as having less potential? How can we combat it as a Black mom community? Advocacy is the number one way I combat a lot of stuff in the school system is advocating hard. Um, there is a gap in our children getting the diagnosis. That is what we know. I mean, what the CDC just came out with a report saying that, oh, autism doesn't affect any race more than the other. We knew that already. So I don't know why they felt to need to just go through all that, but I digress. So there is a gap between our children getting the diagnosis versus, white children getting the diagnosis, which leads to us um, getting the diagnosis later. We can't make that time up that they have not had the resources or the interventions for that time. And then when it comes down to it, the resources lack because there's so much misinformation in our communities. When it comes to developmental disabilities, disabilities in general, neurological disabilities, anything, we don't get the information like the white communities do. So when we see or hear anything that's autism, we automatically think the wrong thing of what autism is not. It scares us a lot of times as parents. And then we don't want our children to have a label or things like that, which then interfere with your child getting the right resources. Then on the hand of the stigmas coming uh, from out of our community that impact us, healthcare professionals, lack it all around when it comes to be culturally responsive to the Black disability community. They don't believe that Black children can be autistic. It's always got to be a behavioral disorder.
Yeah,
They don't. It's oppositional, defiant, ADHD, all of that. They'll look at all of that before autism, as well as healthcare professionals don't want to have conversations with Black moms about disabilities. That is in some of the research that I've looked at. They don't want to start the conversation because of how they perceive Black mothers to be. So because of this, there's a lack of resources all around. That with the information not getting to our community, we don't know where to go to get the resources because there are some resources out there, but then we don't know that they exist because we don't have the information coming to our community. And then in the school system as a whole, it just lacks all around. Again, resources lack on every level for just anybody who has a disability. And then we're talking about Black children who are getting misdiagnosed, put into the wrong categories. They love that emotional disturbed category, which isn't even a mental health diagnosis. So there's
and
that.
I know
So
the Black community, you also as a Black person, sometimes you're afraid to apply for resources because you don't want to seem like that stereotypical. Let me tell y'all this though.
mhm,
I work
mhm,
I've worked with a lot of affluent white families, and you best
mhm,
believe that they have every resource paying for their child to go to public school. I mean, private school. Like, and these are people that could
mhm,
afford it. So don't
mhm,
feel like those resources are just for like poor people. It has nothing to they exclude like certain incomes because the child,
mhm,
especially after they're 18, they're like their own person. So don't be
mhm,
afraid to get those resources. It's not the diagnosis that makes because people are like, oh, my child is already Black, it's already gonna be hard, I don't want
mhm,
to. No, what's gonna be hard,
mhm.
you go through life and you don't get the services and the resources they need. As long as you
Exactly.
need it and you have the resources and the services that they need, it's not a matter
Mhm,
of fact, it's gonna make things better because they get certain resources like access to public schools. In Baltimore, the county will pay for you to go to a private school if you feel like a
mhm.
public school is not suitable. So it could really benefit them. You just want to make sure you utilize
Exactly.
resources properly and make sure you get them. So
Mhm,
as long as you get the resources, they're fine. It's just like anything else. Just like if you had cancer, you treat it. I'm not saying that autism is
mhm.
cancer, but you know what I'm saying. Like if you had anything else, you treat it.
Exactly.
So it's not a bad thing.
Exactly. And the second part of your question is advocating. We have to make sure that we're showing up in the school. I make sure that they see my Black face in the school all the time and know who my children are, and I make sure they know that when it comes to my children, certain things just not gonna fly with me. I'm the type that, I'm going to have my child's back in public, and then in private will address what's going on. But I always make sure I'm advocating for them hard in school. I make sure I know their rights. I make sure I know policies and procedures, because I know off top that certain things, because we're Black, it's just not going to happen with us. So I have to make sure that I'm extra well versed on what's going on so that I can advocate properly. Because when we're talking about the school system in general, they're going to rely on you not knowing anyway on what your rights are. So we have to make sure we know what our rights are. We have to make sure that, we're showing up when we can for our children, that they know that this is their mom. And it's crazy as it seems, I make my husband, come. I'm like, they need
That
to
is
know
not
that his daddy
let them
is
know we
Black.
got that.
Yeah, and that's stuff that we have to think. I'm like, you gotta go to, I tell you, I'm sorry, your patient's gonna have to wait. You're gonna have to come to the school so they can see you at Meet the Teacher Day, so they know that you're in their life. And that's just things that we have to do, because they automatically think, our children don't have daddies, and that's why they're out here acting reckless and things like that. So these are things that we have to do, but it comes down to to advocating. Make sure we're advocating. It says, love the conversation. This is why, as a father, I do my best to tell my children that their actions and behaviors have consequences, and that there are consequences to their actions and behaviors.
And you going up to
Most
the school, right?
definitely.
Making sure you go up to the school too, so they know they got a daddy.
Yeah. Let's see. What else? Let's see. Yeah, let's see. Let's see. Mm-hmm. This is so unfortunate because it delays treatment therapy for early intervention. So true. And these having this gap in diagnosis does delay treatment and early interventions, even though we know we're not treating the actual autism, we're treating the characteristics of what comes along. So yes, it
Say that.
does delay it.
I'm so glad you said that.
Hey, I have to tell people try to treatment plan for autism. I'm like, you can't treatment plan for autism. You can
The
do
behavior,
for,
yeah, like you're not treating autism. Autism don't make their child
yes,
what they doing. It's the other things, you know. Environment,
exactly, exactly. She says it's sad that we have to have these conversations with our kids, and even more unfortunate when talks about Black children with ASD. It is unfortunate that we have to have these conversations, that we have to have these conversations so early with our children about the reality of what's going on in our society. Because I know as a parent, we like to, protect our children as much as possible, keep that innocence, so they're not having to have these big worries. But reality is, you know, there were studies that showed that teachers look at Black preschool males in a certain way versus white preschool children, male children. So it's happening early, and we have to have these conversations. We can't be scared as parents. I know it's like having the sex talk. There's a lot of I don't know if I can have the sex talk with my kids, and it comes to the same thing when having the talk with our Black children about keeping them safe. It's like, what do we say? How do we start the conversation? Yes, it's hard, but you start somewhere with them, because regardless if we're not having the talk or not, they're still experiencing things,
Mhm.
because society as a whole is experiencing what happened on a different level. So let's see. I know I'm seeing other things. Okay. She says she is thankful for this conversation because I'm tired of explaining it. Look, I am so tired of talking about this, especially with other people. But it's
I know
something that
her.
we are
Look,
constantly.
hey,
Oh,
Nikki.
I'm tired of the conversation. I'm tired of having. It just really boggles my mind that we're in 2020 and we're still talking to people about racism, and how it affects the disability community even more, because they're more vulnerable. So it just really just it annoys me that we're still having these conversations. It annoys me that we have to have certain platforms to make sure that we're getting the resources because other people don't think about us. That we're constantly left out of conversations as parents to children with disabilities. You know, people are having these conversations with their children and talking about, oh yes, parents, but parents who are raising children with disabilities are always left out of the conversation. You know, and our talks have to be different because our child has a disability. You know, I'm not having the same conversation, you know, my sister may be having with her children. My conversation has to be different because my child is autistic, you know, so I have to account for that in this conversation. You know, that's why, you know, my worries are completely different because I don't know what's going to happen, you know, if she ever has an interaction with the police, because I don't know, you know, how she'll feel that day, you know. So these are things that we have to worry about. Let's see. Any advice on preparing a teen male who doesn't see autism? He says, I'm being paranoid. So he doesn't believe he is autistic and he has a autism diagnosis.
Right.
I would prepare him just as what I would be preparing any other Black male in society right now.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to have to be prepared anyway, unless he's also saying you're paranoid about what's going on for Black people in the community. But he,
Right.
you know,
I mean,
preparing them.
and even if he's not acknowledging autism, he still needs to acknowledge who he is. So,
Mm-hmm.
the diagnosis of autism is just autism. But in
Mm-hmm.
order to make him aware of certain behaviors, certain traits that he has, you still can discuss that without the autism. He can't
Mm-hmm.
deny things that if you're having reflective conversations, like you did this, like, based off your observations, he like, yeah. So that's a problem that we need to talk about, because this is indicative of your character and oh, he doesn't see racism. Oh. So no, but
is your child Black? Is your child Black? I'll ask that first.
well, well, I could actually relate to that because until I married a Black man, I was around, all white people. And I used to think that Black people were exaggerating and that it wasn't as bad as they made it seem. And, like, oh my God, they're
Mm-hmm.
always complaining. And, because I didn't really have that self awareness of, first of all, that, who I was as a Black person, but I was never around Black people. So the banter, what I heard came from white voices, and so I, even though I was Black, I still had implicit bias on Black people. Like my husband always
Mm-hmm.
jokes about that because when he met me, I just was ignorant to a lot of things about, my own culture. But then when I met him, I was like, oh, dad, this is true. Because I'm with him,
Mm-hmm.
and these things are happening. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing how people look at him because he's a big Black man, And then I
Mm-hmm.
realized, oh my God, Joy, it's certain things that I've been subject to, but I was oblivious to it. Because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even realize what was going on. Like, but I
Mm-hmm.
didn't realize,
Mm-hmm.
wasn't aware of my Blackness.
Yeah. And then I
Mm-hmm.
also think, you know, for a lot of our children, they're in their own kind of space. So, you know, things that are happening around them, they may not notice because, you know, they have no interest in it. So that is another reason, but it's also going to be about having the conversation anyway. She says, yes, he's high functioning, but misses many social situations. And
Mm-hmm.
it's common. It's common and it happens. So it's still just talking with him and having those conversations with him, regardless. You know, you're still going to, because you know, even if he gets in the situation later where then he's realizing, oh, okay, he has that information with him. He has, okay, well, this is what she taught me when we have when this interaction happens. So I still have the information. You know.
Mm-hmm. I was telling my husband when this whole situation happened, he had been fed up years ago, but I
Mhm.
finally felt that feeling. I have had,
Mhm.
it's progressively been getting greater, but now I think I've hit the point, and I'm like, my plateau came a lot later than yours because my awareness was, you've been aware your whole life,
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
because my awareness was delayed, like my plateau wasn't hit as quickly as yours was, and it's just like, how have you been? Wow, I kind of felt like, it took
Mhm.
years for the fuzz to clear it. I'm like, what is going on?
Mhm. Mhm.
My mother-in-law the other day
Yeah.
was like, proud of you. Because I used to tell her, because she works for a lot of different like civil rights agencies, and I used to be like,
Mhm.
y'all just, and she's like, I'm so proud of you. You all power to the people, and you used to be like, y'all are delusional.
Yeah, it is a tiring thing, and having to hit that plateau, and it's like, oh my God, you guys. But these are conversations that we have to have with our children, because at the end of the day, we do have to prepare our children, because other people may not be preparing their children. They may not be talking to their children on how to be anti-racist. So we have to teach our children, especially those who, are autistic and probably have are oblivious to certain things. Like my child doesn't know when she's being bullied or not. So having the is somebody being racist to me or not thing. So that's something we have to talk to her about, because she's going to be oblivious to it, because she doesn't even know when people are being bullying with her or being facetious with her or making fun of her. So that's why we have to have these conversations, because so they can understand and know when these things are happening. Like, okay, mom talked about this, so now I need to go and talk to my mom about what is happening. And that's what something you want to tell them as well. They need to be having the conversations with you as well. Something is occurring and happening in the school system, or happening when they're, walking home and they're thinking, oh, it's nothing. They still need to be having the conversations with you, so that you can do what you need to do as a parent, as well. Because we know that when we are advocating for our children, it goes above and beyond when our children have disabilities. Okay. So she says they turned cop prep into a game when the kids were younger. They liked having us go outside, knock on the door, and practice their response.
Hmm.
Okay. Now, I will say for me, even with having the tip of calling the police and having my children meet them, for me personally, that brings me a lot of anxiety. So that is something like I've had to have the conversation with my husband about, like, you know, having them there, and, them saying, oh, your child can get in the car, and I don't want to see my kid in the car, type of thing. So, for me, it brings a lot of anxiety. And then with it being a game, I also don't want my children to think it's
Fun.
fun.
Mm-hmm.
So exactly, so that is just, where I'm at with it. If it works for you, that's, I'm all for it. But for us, it's such a serious matter, and it's something that brings a lot of anxiety for me personally as a parent, that I want them to understand and take it serious. So I just break it down on their level, and we have bits and pieces of the conversation on their level. She says, so you guys suggest to not show the kids the protests and riots, or not to.
Um,
I think if you're seeing it, if you're looking at it, they're going to be seeing it. So I mean, you said it was already on the Roblox. So I mean, your child might be getting
I'm
exposed, and you don't know.
I'm going to a protest with. I've already take my child has been to two already. So
So
I guess I will be. I'll take my
hmm
children. They need to see it. My 6-year-old has been to two Lives Matter protests already. Of course, we're not
hmm
there at night. If you go in the daytime.
hmm
So, and she knows what's going on, and we've had to have these conversations with her. She's real
hmm
power to the people too.
Yes, exactly. I also don't have a problem with my kids seeing protests. It's not something for me personally that I have a problem with. It's our daily life that we live. So they have to understand these things. It's a part of, you know, being a black person in America today. Let's see. Can you speak about sex education and perceived aggressive behaviors that result from sexual frustration, lack of clear education? How do you address this with your children and the wider community, so that it is not misunderstood?
Um, First of all, a lot of times with children that are diagnosed with autism and adults, sex is not always like sexual. It can just be
Mhm,
another sensory seeking behavior. So you first need to assess, is this something, like, depending on when it's happening? Like if it's happening when they're frustrated, overstimulated. This could be a means to sensory seeking and not necessarily sexual. It just could have been something that they discovered through that certain specific type of touch, but it's not. But
Mhm. Mhm.
I really, really drive home that you have to start talking to kids about sex education early, around not early, appropriately when puberty hits, because that's
Mhm.
when things start happening. They need to know about safety, because
Mhm.
children, if they're masturbating, they need to know how to do it properly. You need to have that
Mhm.
conversation. Don't stick certain things where certain things don't go, and how to use. They need to know, just like any other skill, they need to master that, but also
Mhm.
learn
Mhm.
to do it when it's appropriate, like behind closed doors, privately, in your alone time. If you have that feeling when you're out in public, then you need to discover certain things that have the same type of sensory input, like match replacement sensory input, like some type of
Mhm.
squeezing, tactile, that makes them have that same release that they need. So you just want to help them to develop replacement behavior that will still give them sensory, that they can carry tools or different things out in public when they need it. But I feel like sexual behaviors being perceived as aggressive is more of I guess it's a cultural thing, like,
Mhm.
because it's,
Mhm.
in Germany, sex, and it's not so taboo, and it's not so, I think Americans
Mhm.
are really like taken back by that. And they don't realize that
Yes.
people, if you lack certain skills, functional communication, and you haven't yet developed certain coping mechanisms, then it's going to be something that you engage in until you find otherwise. So the key is making sure that you develop and help them find strategies to cope and to do things in public in replacement of that. But
Mhm.
it's a natural thing that children that are going through puberty are going to want to feel, and they should
Mhm.
never be denied access to their own bodies in private. That's something that's their
Mhm.
business, they could do. But in public, you just have to help them, find a means to get that out. But I think having conversations with, masturbation being something that's kids do that, like, I don't mean little kids.
Mhm.
And actually some little kids do if it's sensory seeking,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
pubescent, kids that are going through puberty, it's just something that's going to happen, and you need to have those conversations, not try to extinguish it, not try to say don't do that. You need to tell them how to
Mhm.
do it, so because you kids will stick things places or stick their things in places, and you don't want like, it's true, like, you want to say, look, this is what you need, these are the proper tools, don't use that,
Mhm.
get the
If you
napkin.
guys haven't noticed, Joy speaks truth and she tells it straight to the point, which I love. So Tia says we had to show our child because they are happening in our area 2 minutes from my home. Yes, and especially in a lot of cities like Washington D.C., Philly, Baltimore, it is happening wherever you're going, and they're seeing the places boarded up. So like we said, not having certain conversations because you're not thinking they're seeing it, but they're seeing it. So having these conversations, and it's not about like you were saying, making them fearful. It's just about educating them and letting them know what's going on, giving them the information. There's nothing wrong with your child having information on what's going on in society that they live in. I'm
And
a firm believer in that.
my 20-year-old is home right now too, because everything is,
Mhm.
so I also have a 20-year-old. So
Mhm.
I feel like, from older and standard, older, little and big, my 20-year-old,
Mhm.
she wants to be involved, so I'm like, okay, we're all going to be there so we can, make sure that you're safe and we're together, you
Mhm.
know. But I think it's beautiful that she wants to be involved. And so I will want, hopefully these same things won't be going on by the time my 6-year-old turns 20, but I would want
Yeah.
her to be a voice when she feels like she should be a voice, and to stand up for her rights and
Mhm.
her. You can do that in a nonviolent manner, like, you don't have to break things. And just so y'all know, these protests, it's not the protests because I've seen it. It's other things.
And she says, "Thank you. I just wanted to make sure with autism community that is okay, and I wasn't the only one who thought that way." And I definitely think within the autism community they are very progressive about certain things. So certain movements, then they're out there protesting and lobbying for certain things. So especially when it comes to um, not having the same rights and regards as other people. So, when we're looking at, these protests that are happening, we also have to think about their safety as well, because we're looking at the stats of 1 in 5, and then add in blackness, and it's even higher. We're looking at 50% of those with disabilities will have an interaction with the police officers. We're looking at these kind of stats, and the truth is our children have a 50-50 chance of having an interaction with a police officer, higher if they're black. So we just have to really make sure we're preparing them and having these talks with them and being realistic with these talks. I can't stress that as enough. As a therapist, a lot of times we're not having real talks with our children. We're having reassuring, sugarcoating conversations, and then something happens and it's so traumatic for the child because you have reassured them so much that it's not going to happen, and then the situation happens, and then it's so traumatic for them, and then they're seeing therapists to help deal with that trauma. So we have to think about these things, and then think about yourself as the parent and how you need to be practicing self-care and setting boundaries with those around you, and making sure that you are well informed, but also making sure that you are protecting your peace. I'm big on protecting my peace. I am, all things, all black all day, autism and black all day, but at the same time, I still set boundaries and make sure that I'm protecting my peace as well.
Oh,
So I just want to say
but
that.
well, from an autistic person's perspective,
Hmm.
and it's not just me. I was very upset when I found out my parents would sugarcoat and protect me from things, because inevitably it didn't help. I wasn't prepared, like you said, but I also felt
Hmm.
like they didn't. It was kind of like insulting my intelligence.
Hmm.
Why didn't you tell
Hmm.
me this? Why would you not? Everybody else knew. Why don't I know? And then
Hmm.
you find yourself kind of upset and angry. Like, you said that I'm just different and not less, but you're not giving me the same things that you give everybody else, especially if they have
Hmm.
neurotypical siblings. And their
Hmm.
siblings know more than that. It's like, well, what's going on? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't because you're autistic? What's that got to do with anything? I still need to know that too. So
Yeah. That's a good perspective, because I am, not autistic, so I can't ever speak from that perspective. So that is good information for us parents to know, that when we think our children don't understand, they do understand, and then they'll feel betrayed, when they do find out the information and find out that we weren't telling them the truth. So keep those things in mind when you're having these conversations. And black parents, please protect your peace. When you're having these conversations, it can be traumatic for us as well, and it's re-traumatizing for us to see this everywhere. So make sure you are keeping that in mind when you're having these conversations with your children, and keeping it on their level. Make sure you're going to Joy's page and getting her social stories that can help start the conversation. Make sure we're being as prepared as possible, but to an extent, know that what is out of your control is out of your control. What's in your control, you can control it. What's out of your control, you can't. So we can't necessarily worry about those things, even though we are. I'm just trying to help you protect your peace a little bit more and provide some self-care. So we have been on here for about an hour and a half, so we are going to wrap that up. If there's any questions, you all can make sure to join my group or post them on Joy's page is Joy F. Johnson, MEDMS, her
oh my,
Facebook page.
yeah,
Yes. And
I
on
know it.
Instagram, and on Instagram, she's Joy F. Johnson.
Yeah.
Um, so I have, if you go to if you're on my page now, you'll see I've shared some of her content so you can get to her Facebook page. But she is most active on Instagram. That's where she shares everything, and she talks about everything. And I'm constantly reposting. I'm like, yes, hallelujah, talk
I'm aware.
about it.
Look, I'm aware. I'm an autistic person that's aware of their limits. It's having
Hmm.
two is just too much for me. Like, it's too much
Hmm.
to go both. So it shares from Instagram to Facebook, but I'm not really on Instagram. So if you're trying to really get in touch with me or something, DM me on Instagram, not
Hmm.
Facebook.
Yeah, and there is her website across the bottom. She does a lot of great work. She is taking donations for Black families who are not able to get behavioral services. So you can go to her
If
page.
you're a Black family too that needs behavioral services and can't get it, like fill out, go to my website and fill out a contact form, and
Hmm.
I'll get back in touch with you. Because
Hmm.
that's what I'm trying to move towards, just being able to maybe go nonprofit status and help people,
Hmm.
like who can't afford it to get
Yes.
services.
And she is definitely, like I told y'all, she helped, she was given all types of recommendations from my son, and he is a different person, halfway.
Home base.
Homeboy is out here being different. So her information is so valuable, and I always love that she is willing to come on the platform and speak to us parents from a perspective that we're not privy to. So I love that she is always willing to do that. So make sure you guys check her out. If you're not familiar with my website, it is autismandblack.org. So if you have any questions that we didn't get to, make sure you put them in the comments and I'll check them. You can reach out to Joy as well. But other than that, protect your peace. Link to supporting Joy's Fund. So you can PayPal her at joyfjohnson@gmail.com. That's that how
Joy
they send the money?
Joy F Johnson 77 @gmail.com.
Joy F Johnson 77 at gmail.com, and that is how you can donate to the fund. She has all of that information as well on her Instagram page, Joy F Johnson, and you can reach out to her as well. So make sure you guys protect your peace. Make sure you guys are taking care of yourself, especially now during these times. So other than that, have a great weekend, and I will probably pop back on for some other conversations, next week. But other than that, have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Let's see.